The first thing you'll notice is that all my surfaces are covered. The newspaper's down and I've got my turntable covered with cling film because the airbrush colour gets everywhere. I'm starting with chroma colours in teal and I'm airbrushing from the bottom corner up to the middle. I'm wanting the colour to be graduated from dark at the bottom to completely faded out into the main cake at the middle. So where I start is away from the area where I want the fade out because you need to get used to the way the airbrush feels in your hand. So I always start from the darkest bit and I go in very gently at first. So I'm aiming for the bottom corner. I'm holding the airbrush about 8 inches away from the cake and I've got it on the gentlest setting and you can see I'm moving in circles, round and round, because if I was to point in one direction I would just get a concentration of colour on my cake. So the circles stop this happening. At the same time as airbrushing in the little circles, you'll notice I'm always turning the turntable around. So everything's moving, nothing's stationary, so I won't get a pooling of colour on the cake. It'll all be very gradual and very gentle. And the airbrush really is on the very, very gentlest setting and it's held quite far away from the cake. So I just continue doing that, building up the colour gradually on the bottom. And the very edges of my circles, where I'm making that circle round and round, they're catching in the middle of the cake, so there's a very gentle fading in that area. And just keep going till I'm happy. You'll see as the cake's turning round, every so often at the back, a vertical stripe on the cake. This is the shape of the cake dummy underneath the sugar paste. If this cake dummy had have been for a wedding fair or anywhere that it was going to be seen in public, I would have sorted this stripe before I covered it. I would have filled the gap with royal icing and let that harden before putting sugar paste on the cake. But because it's only for photography and getting a few lovely cake pictures, I'm not really bothered about that big stripe because I'll just put it at the back. Here you see me refilling the airbrush still with some more teal, just a few drops, and that'll do. Once I'm happy that I've got a nice graduated colour up to the middle, I go in again towards the bottom corner and just start to deepen up the tone a bit. I'm squeezing the airbrush trigger just a little bit more to have a little bit more colour come out, but not very much, it's still all very gentle. And I'm aiming into the bottom corner, so that's where the main colour's going to build up. I've changed colours now and I'm going with Fractal Colours Indigo, which is a lovely deep shade of blue. And I'm aiming for the very, very bottom edge of the cake because I want a real concentrated colour down here. In fact, I'm not even aiming at the bottom of the cake, I'm aiming at the baking paper and not at the cake at all. So it's just the very edges of the little circles that I'm making that's catching the cake. So it's a very, very gradual colour build up again, very gently, so we get that faded out edge. Every single time I start the airbrush, I do a test, either on the newspaper or on a piece of kitchen roll, just to make sure the colour's coming out of the airbrush nicely. Because what can happen is the colour might splatter a bit, and that's no good if that's happening on your cake. So it's best to do that tester off the cake first. So every single time. Once I've got that initial bit of colour in the bottom corner, I can make my circling a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, so that I then catch a bigger area and my indigo blue just travels that little bit further up the cake. And I just keep going until I'm happy. You'll notice, unfortunately, that my hand's out of shot a lot here. I have got the cake in the wrong position and I'm airbrushing off the side of the picture. But what I'm doing here is coming back in with the turquoise again, just to deepen up that colour in the bottom corner over the indigo and get everything looking a bit more rich and dark right down at the bottom. So same method as before, the little circles, but a wee bit more strong this time in the colouring. Now I'm going to airbrush on just 2 or 3 little snowflakes from a couple of little snowflake stencils that I have. And what I've done is I have wrapped the cake in baking paper to stop any stray airbrush colour going on the rest of the cake. Probably having the whole cake covered is a bit overkill, but actually it saves me having to hold anything and it sits nicely in place without me having to worry about having 3 hands. The little snowflake stencils I have sellotaped just at the top to keep in position, and I've put some non-slip mat underneath the cake as well so things don't slide about. I've moved the cake to the very edge of the turntable so the little stencils can hang down nicely and not be obstructed by anything. And the reason that I've stuck the stencil to the baking paper is just to have another support, really, so that there's as small a chance as possible of the stencil moving while I'm airbrushing, because if you move the stencil while you're airbrushing, you'll just get a blurry outline. So it just helps keep things in place. So I test my airbrushes working on the newspaper, as I do every time, and then carefully hold the stencil in place, and I'm not going to move until the airbrushing is finished. The first one was done in indigo, and the second and third will do in teal. And we're finished.